In the dry, windswept foothills of Chile's Atacama Desert, an unusual skeleton was discovered by a treasure hunter named Oscar Munoz. Small, barely 6 inches long, it immediately drew attention not just for its size, but for its strikingly human-like features. And yet, something about it was unmistakably anomalous. The native peoples of the region had long spoken of Gentiles, tiny beings glimpsed for centuries, sometimes in tandem with strange, luminous objects moving through the sky. After the find, the skeleton was passed into the care of Spanish businessman Ramon Navia Osorio. The skeleton was first examined by a specialist team in Barcelona. Anthropologists, radiologists, and geneticists conducted X-rays, CT scans, and bone marrow analyses, documenting unusual features like the narrow but fully formed ribcage and proportionally shaped limbs, a skull with more bones than a human infant, and a fully articulated spinal column. Years later, in 2009, Dr. Stephen Greer was invited to review the case and connect experts, bringing the skeleton into the public eye. He worked with Dr. Gary Nolan at Stanford University to coordinate further research. The team's early studies confirmed the skeleton was not a hoax or manipulated human fetus, and preliminary genetic analysis showed some human markers, but others were highly anomalous, hinting at either a distant evolutionary divergence or an entirely unknown species. A separate, pivotal assessment came from Dr. Ralph Lockman, a pediatric radiologist at Stanford.
So luckily, here at Stanford, we happen to have literally the world's expert, the man who wrote the book on bone dysplasias and syndromes, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ralph Lockman.
Based on X-ray and radiographic evaluation, he determined that the bone density and epiphyseal plates of the skeleton corresponded to a child roughly 6 to 8 years old, an age physically impossible for a specimen only 6 inches long. This finding decisively ruled out the idea that the skeleton was a fetus or newborn, and reinforced the conclusion that this was a being that had lived long enough for full skeletal calcification.
The epiphyseal plates, if you look at the X-ray, which is the growth plates. You know when you have, the growth plates in a kid and they hurt their leg? The growth plates and the bone density is that of a 6 to 8 year old.
The shock, I think, and the surprise was, and the absolute certainty that Dr. Lockman had was that this specimen was clearly not fetal, right? Even though the size of the specimen would suggest that it's fetal, but that by comparing the growth plates to known standards, this is clearly between 6 to 8 years old.
Then the narrative began to shift. In late 2012, shortly after bone marrow samples were handed over for analysis, Dr. Nolan allegedly received a $3.2 million grant from the Department of Defense. Within months, the story emerging publicly had transformed. Major outlets, including the New York Times, CNN, and the BBC, reported the skeleton as simply a deformed human fetus, a dramatic simplification, at odds with the complex anomalies observed by Greer and his team. According to Greer, the timing of the funding and the sudden pivot in narrative was, at the very least, suspicious. This case highlights a recurring problem. UFO evidence is often minimized or hidden. From Project Blue Book to the Condon Committee in the 1960s, and continuing into modern UFO research, reports of objects, beings, or technologies that don't fit conventional science have frequently been downplayed, misrepresented, or withheld from the public. Intel agencies, media conglomerates, and even mainstream scientific institutions have, at times, acted in concert to steer public perception, often in the name of national security or narrative control. If this is the backdrop, how should we approach claims of scientific authority? Many of the researchers, doctors, and geneticists we trust are products of the same system that has historically suppressed anomalous findings. Even without malicious intent, their training, their textbooks, their professional networks have been shaped within a framework that may exclude or misinterpret phenomena like UFOs, zero-point energy, or the anomalous Atacama skeleton. In other words, the knowledge they rely on may itself be incomplete, or worse, intentionally curated. The Atacama humanoid, therefore, is not just a single skeleton. It is a case study in epistemic caution. It challenges us to question the assumptions of authority and the integrity of the systems that create consensus. Its anomalies, the unusual skeletal structure, the unusual growth plates, the mysterious origins, persist, despite repeated attempts to dismiss the story.